Something extraordinary is happening in the silver market right now, and I'm not talking about price movements or technical patterns. I'm talking about a structural failure that's been decades in the making, finally reaching its breaking point. In early December, something unprecedented occurred at the COMEX silver vaults. In just 4 days, over 60% of registered silver, the metal actually available for delivery, was claimed by contract holders demanding physical metal. 60%. In 4 days. Let me put that in perspective. The COMEX has operated for over 50 years, and we've never seen anything like this. This isn't normal market behavior. This is panic. But here's what makes this truly alarming. The COMEX didn't just experience a surge in delivery requests. The entire system experienced what they called a technical outage right as this was happening. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? When the pressure builds and people start demanding their metal, suddenly the systems go dark. You can't make this up. Now, I want you to understand something fundamental about how the silver market actually works, because this is where the house of cards really reveals itself. For every ounce of physical silver that exists in COMEX vaults, there are estimated to be between 100 and 250 paper claims on that same ounce. Think about that. If you own a silver futures contract, you're essentially holding a claim ticket, but there are 99 to 249 other people holding claim tickets for that exact same bar of metal. This works fine as long as everyone plays along with the paper game. As long as most contract holders just roll their contracts forward or settle in cash, the system hums along. But what happens when people start saying, "No, I don't want cash. I want my silver"? That's when you get December 2025. That's when you get 60% of available silver claimed in 4 days. That's when you get technical outages. The banking system has been running this game for decades. They've suppressed silver prices through massive short positions, creating an artificial ceiling that's kept this metal absurdly undervalued relative to its actual supply and demand fundamentals. And they've gotten away with it because the system was never stress tested. Until now. Let me walk you through what's actually happening beneath the surface, because this goes so much deeper than most people realize. The silver market isn't just experiencing a supply squeeze. It's experiencing a crisis of confidence in paper claims versus physical metal. And that distinction is everything. You see, the bullion banks, the major players who make markets in precious metals, have been operating under an assumption that's now proving catastrophically wrong. They assumed that physical demand would remain relatively stable and predictable. They assumed that most market participants would continue accepting paper settlements. They assumed that the ratio of paper claims to physical metal could remain at extreme levels indefinitely. Every single one of those assumptions is now being challenged simultaneously. The physical silver market has been in deficit for 5 consecutive years. That means global demand has exceeded newly mined supply every single year since 2020. Where's the shortfall being made up? From above-ground stockpiles, from existing inventories, from the very vaults that are now being drained at unprecedented rates. This isn't sustainable, and everyone in the industry knows it. But here's where it gets really interesting. The deficit isn't being driven by investment demand alone. Industrial demand for silver has exploded, and it's not slowing down. Every solar panel requires silver. Every electric vehicle requires significantly more silver than a traditional car. 5G infrastructure, medical devices, water purification systems, the list goes on. Silver isn't just a monetary metal anymore. It's become absolutely critical to the technological infrastructure of modern civilization. The Silver Institute projects that industrial demand will continue growing across key technology sectors over the next 5 years. Solar panel production alone is consuming silver at rates that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. And here's the kicker. This demand is inelastic. You can't build a solar panel without silver. You can't manufacture these technologies with substitutes that work as well. The industrial users need physical metal, and they need it now. So you've got industrial users competing with investors for a shrinking pool of available silver. You've got a market that's been in deficit for 5 years straight. You've got COMEX vaults being drained at historic rates. And you've got a banking system that's massively short silver through derivatives and futures contracts, betting that they'll never have to actually deliver the physical metal. What could possibly go wrong? Let me tell you about something that happened in the nickel market in early 2022, because it's a perfect preview of what's coming for silver. The London Metal Exchange had to halt nickel trading and actually canceled trades after prices went absolutely parabolic. Why? Because a major Chinese producer had massive short positions and couldn't deliver the physical metal. The entire market seized up. Trades that had already been executed were retroactively canceled. The exchange literally rewrote the rules mid-game to save certain participants from catastrophic losses. Now, the silver market is exponentially larger and more important than nickel, but the structural problems are remarkably similar. You've got concentrated short positions held by a small number of banks. You've got a growing gap between paper claims and physical availability. You've got increasing delivery demands that the system wasn't designed to handle. The nickel crisis was a warning shot. Silver could be the main event. And the banks know this. That's why you're seeing increasingly desperate measures to manage the situation. The technical outages at COMEX, the manipulation of lease rates to discourage physical delivery, the coordinated short selling to suppress price spikes. These aren't normal market operations. These are the actions of institutions trying to prevent a systemic failure. Here's something most people don't understand about silver lease rates. When you see silver lease rates spike, and they've been hitting levels not seen in years, that's telling you something critical about physical availability. Lease rates represent the cost of borrowing physical silver. When those rates surge, it means physical metal is scarce and in high demand. It means the people who have silver don't want to lend it out, even at elevated rates, because they're not confident they'll get it back. In October 2025, global silver markets experienced what industry insiders described as turmoil due to soaring lease rates. Refiners were struggling to source physical metal. The spread between paper prices and physical premiums widened dramatically. This is what a market under severe stress looks like. This is what happens when the paper game starts breaking down. Now let's talk about what this means for the banking system, because that's where the real danger lies. The major bullion banks aren't just market makers in silver. They're deeply interconnected with the broader financial system through derivatives, swaps, and complex financial instruments that most people have never heard of. Their silver positions aren't isolated bets. They're part of a massive web of interconnected risk. When silver prices were suppressed and stable, these positions were manageable. But what happens when physical delivery demands surge? What happens when the banks can't source enough metal to meet their obligations? What happens when the ratio of paper claims to physical silver becomes impossible to maintain? You get a cascade of failures that could ripple through the entire financial system. Think about the mechanics of this for a moment. A bank has sold short positions in silver futures, betting that prices will stay low or that they'll never have to deliver physical metal. But now, contract holders are demanding delivery in unprecedented numbers. The bank needs to source physical silver to meet these obligations. But physical silver is scarce, and what's available is trading at significant premiums to the paper price. The bank is forced to buy physical metal at elevated prices to cover short positions they sold at much lower prices. That's a direct loss. Multiply that across thousands of contracts and multiple institutions, and you're talking about losses that could threaten solvency. But it gets worse, because these banks have used their silver positions as collateral for other financial activities. They've built derivative structures on top of these positions. They've made assumptions about their balance sheets based on the value and stability of these holdings. When those assumptions prove wrong, when those positions start generating massive losses, the contagion spreads. Other counterparties get nervous. Credit lines get pulled. Margin calls cascade through the system. This is how financial crises accelerate. And here's the truly frightening part. The regulatory authorities and central banks know this is happening, and they're caught in an impossible position. Do they let the market function freely and risk a catastrophic failure of major financial institutions? Or do they intervene to protect the banks, further eroding confidence in the integrity of markets and the value of paper claims? There's no good option here. Every choice leads to consequences that undermine the system in different ways. Let me paint you a picture of what a silver delivery failure would actually look like, because this isn't some abstract financial concept. This is a real scenario that's becoming increasingly plausible. Imagine a major bank receives delivery demands that exceed its ability to source physical metal. It defaults on its delivery obligations. Suddenly, thousands of contract holders who thought they owned silver discover they're holding worthless paper. Confidence in the COMEX evaporates overnight. Everyone with silver contracts rushes to demand delivery simultaneously. The exchange is forced to halt trading or implement cash settlements at prices that bear no relationship to the actual value of physical metal. The paper price and physical price completely decouple. The entire price discovery mechanism breaks down. This isn't speculation. This is exactly what happened in the nickel market, just on a smaller scale. And the silver market has all the same structural vulnerabilities, amplified by the fact that silver is both a monetary metal and a critical industrial commodity. the stakes are exponentially higher. Now, I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about something that's relevant if you're thinking about how to protect yourself in this environment. If you're sitting on retirement accounts worth $100,000 or more, you might want to look into how gold IRAs work. I've put together a free guide that covers how you can get physical precious metals into your retirement account without triggering tax penalties. It's in the description below. Just something to consider given what we're seeing in these markets, worth understanding your options. But back to the crisis at hand, because we need to talk about the timeline here. How long can the banks keep this game going? How long before the structural problems become impossible to paper over? The December vault drain suggests we're closer to the breaking point than most people realize. When 60% of available silver gets claimed in 4 days, that's not a normal market fluctuation. That's a system under extreme stress, possibly in the early stages of failure. And here's what makes this particularly dangerous. The banks can't simply produce more silver to meet demand. This isn't like printing currency or creating digital credits. Physical silver has to be mined, refined, and delivered. That process takes time. Global mine production is relatively inelastic in the short term. You can't just flip a switch and double silver output. So when physical demand surges beyond available supply, there's no quick fix. The banks are trapped. Some analysts are now projecting silver prices could reach $80 or higher if this situation continues to deteriorate. But honestly, price predictions miss the point. If we're talking about a genuine delivery failure, if we're talking about the paper market breaking down completely, then price becomes almost meaningless. What matters is whether you're holding physical metal or paper claims. What matters is whether the system can actually deliver on its promises. The COMEX has implemented various mechanisms to discourage physical delivery over the years. They've adjusted margin requirements, they've modified contract specifications, they've created financial incentives for cash settlement. All of these measures are designed to keep the paper game going, to prevent the system from being stress tested by actual delivery demands. But these mechanisms only work if market participants voluntarily go along with them. When confidence breaks, when people decide they want physical metal regardless of the financial incentives to settle in cash, all these mechanisms become irrelevant. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. Despite all the structural disincentives to taking delivery, despite the premiums and logistics and storage costs, people are demanding physical silver in unprecedented numbers. That tells you something profound about confidence in the system. That tells you people are waking up to the difference between owning metal and owning a claim on metal. Let's talk about the historical parallels here, because we've seen this movie before, just with different actors. In 1980, the Hunt brothers tried to corner the silver market. They accumulated massive physical positions, driving prices to all-time highs. The exchanges responded by changing the rules mid-game, implementing position limits and margin requirements specifically designed to break the Hunts. The market crashed, the Hunts went bankrupt, and the lesson was clear. Don't challenge the system's control over silver prices. But here's the difference between 1980 and now. The Hunts were a small group of wealthy individuals trying to manipulate the market. What's happening today is organic, distributed demand from thousands of participants across the globe, driven by both investment and industrial needs. You can't break this by changing margin requirements or implementing position limits. This is fundamental supply and demand asserting itself against decades of price suppression. This is the market calling the bank's bluff. The geopolitical dimension of this crisis makes it even more complex. Central banks around the world, particularly in BRICS nations, have been accumulating gold at record rates. They're diversifying away from dollar-denominated assets, building reserves of physical precious metals as a hedge against currency debasement and geopolitical instability. While gold gets most of the attention, silver is part of this same dynamic. It's a monetary metal with thousands of years of history as a store of value. And it's currently trading at a gold-to-silver ratio that's historically extreme, suggesting silver is dramatically undervalued relative to gold. If central banks and sovereign wealth funds start accumulating silver the way they've been accumulating gold, the physical market could face demand that completely overwhelms available supply. We're talking about entities with effectively unlimited purchasing power, competing for a metal that's already in deficit. The implications are staggering. The industrial demand story deserves more attention because this is what makes silver unique among precious metals. Gold is primarily a monetary metal and a store of value. Silver is both a monetary metal and an irreplaceable industrial commodity. That dual nature creates demand dynamics that gold doesn't face. When you combine investment demand with inelastic industrial demand, you get a market that's fundamentally different from other precious metals. Consider the solar panel industry alone. The global push toward renewable energy means solar installations are growing exponentially. Each solar panel requires silver for its photovoltaic cells. There's no substitute that works as well. As solar deployment accelerates, silver consumption from this single industry could absorb a significant portion of global mine production. Add in electric vehicles, 5G infrastructure, medical applications, and all the other industrial uses, and you start to understand why the deficit keeps growing year after year. The banks betting against silver through short positions are essentially betting that industrial demand will slow, that investment demand will remain subdued, and that the paper market will continue functioning as it always has. Every one of those bets is looking increasingly wrong. Industrial demand is accelerating, not slowing. Investment demand is surging as people lose confidence in fiat currencies and seek hard assets, and the paper market is showing signs of severe stress, possibly approaching failure. What happens next depends on how quickly the situation deteriorates and how authorities respond. If the COMEX experiences a genuine delivery failure, if a major bank defaults on its silver obligations, we could see emergency measures that make the nickel market intervention look tame by comparison. Trading halts, forced cash settlements, retroactive rule changes, all designed to protect the institutions that created this mess in the first place. But here's the problem with that approach. Every intervention that protects the banks further erodes confidence in the integrity of markets. Every time the rules get changed to prevent losses for well-connected institutions, more people decide they'd rather hold physical metal than trust the system. The interventions designed to prevent crisis actually accelerate the loss of confidence that makes crisis inevitable. We're watching a slow-motion train wreck, and the engineers are frantically trying to stop it by rewriting the laws of physics. It's not going to work. The fundamental imbalance between paper claims and physical availability can't be resolved through regulatory intervention or market manipulation. At some point, reality asserts itself. At some point, the gap between what the system promises and what it can actually deliver becomes impossible to hide. The December vault drain might be remembered as the moment when the silver market's structural problems became undeniable. 60% of registered silver claimed in 4 days isn't a statistic you can explain away. It's not a temporary anomaly or a technical glitch. It's evidence of a system under extreme stress, possibly in the early stages of failure, and the technical outage that coincided with this event? That's not reassuring. That's terrifying, because it suggests the authorities are already resorting to desperate measures to manage a situation that's spiraling out of control. Here's what you need to understand about systemic risk in financial markets. Failures don't happen gradually. They happen suddenly, after long periods of apparent stability. The system looks fine, looks manageable, right up until the moment it doesn't. The warning signs are there for those paying attention. The vault drains, the lease rate spikes, the delivery demands, the technical outages. But most people won't recognize the danger until it's too late, until the crisis is already unfolding. The silver market has been operating on borrowed time for years, sustained by the assumption that paper claims would remain acceptable substitutes for physical metal. That assumption is breaking down. The December events suggest we're entering a new phase, where the gap between paper and physical becomes impossible to ignore, where delivery demands exceed the system's capacity to fulfill them, where the bank's short positions become existential threats rather than profitable trades. And this isn't just about silver prices or investment returns. This is about the integrity of financial markets, about whether the system can actually deliver on its promises, about whether paper claims represent real assets or just empty promises. When that confidence breaks, when people stop trusting that their contracts and certificates represent actual metal, the consequences ripple far beyond the silver market itself. The banking system has built a house of cards, and silver might be the card that brings it all down. Not because silver is the largest market or the most important commodity, but because it's the market where the gap between paper claims and physical reality has become most extreme, most unsustainable, most obviously fraudulent. When this breaks, and the December events suggest it's breaking now, it will expose the fundamental dishonesty at the heart of modern financial markets. The question isn't whether this system can continue indefinitely. It can't. The question is how much longer it limps along before the breaking point arrives, and what the authorities do when it does. Every intervention buys a little more time, but makes the eventual reckoning more severe. Every rule change and market manipulation erodes confidence and accelerates the shift toward physical metal. The banks are trapped in a game they can't win, fighting against fundamental supply and demand with tools that become less effective each time they're used. We're witnessing something historic here. The silver market has been manipulated and suppressed for decades, but the mechanisms of that suppression are failing. Physical reality is asserting itself against paper promises. Industrial demand is overwhelming available supply. Investors are demanding delivery in unprecedented numbers. The vaults are draining. The system is breaking. And when it finally fails completely, when the paper market collapses and physical silver becomes genuinely scarce, the repricing will be violent and swift. This isn't fear-mongering or speculation. This is analysis based on observable facts. 5 consecutive years of supply deficits, accelerating industrial demand, historic vault drains, spiking lease rates, and a banking system with massive concentrated short positions that are increasingly impossible to maintain. The pieces are all in place for a systemic failure. The only question is timing. And here's the final piece that makes this truly dangerous. The silver market isn't isolated. It's connected to gold markets, to currency markets, to the broader financial system through countless derivatives and interconnected positions. When silver breaks, it won't break alone. The contagion will spread through channels most people don't even know exist, threatening institutions that seem far removed from precious metals markets. This is how systemic crises unfold, not through obvious direct connections, but through hidden linkages that only become apparent when stress reveals them. The banking system is about to learn a very expensive lesson. You can manipulate markets for a long time, but you can't manipulate physical reality. You can create infinite paper claims, but you can't create infinite physical metal. You can suppress prices through derivatives and futures, but you can't suppress actual supply and demand indefinitely. Eventually, the real world asserts itself. Eventually, the gap between promises and reality becomes impossible to maintain. Eventually, the system breaks. That breaking point is approaching faster than most people realize. The December vault drain was a warning. The question is whether anyone in power is listening, or whether they'll keep playing the same games until the entire structure collapses around them. Based on the response so far, the technical outages, the continued manipulation, the desperate attempts to discourage physical delivery, it seems they've chosen to double down rather than face reality. That choice will have consequences for the banks, for the markets, and for everyone who trusted that paper claims represented real assets. The silver market is about to break the banking system, not because silver is trying to break anything, but because the banking system built something that was always going to break. And now, finally, inevitably, it's breaking.